By the time Grant Mercer raised his bourbon glass and began talking about men who had been left behind by their own lack of nerve, Mason Reed was already standing near the service hallway with one hand inside his jacket pocket, touching the folded drawing his daughter had made for him that morning. 7-year-old Ellie had drawn him in a blue suit beneath a crooked yellow sun, holding hands with a woman she had never met. Above them, in uneven purple letters, she had written, "Have a brave night, Dad." Mason had promised he would, yet beneath the chandeliers of Kansas City's Union Station, surrounded by polished marble, white roses, and people who wore confidence like expensive cologne, bravery felt less like a virtue and more like a costume that did not fit. His navy suit had been purchased 9 years earlier for his own wedding. The shoulders sagged now, the cuffs had begun to shine from wear, and one of the trouser hems had been repaired with thread slightly darker than the fabric. No one had mentioned it directly when he arrived. They had not needed to. Their eyes had done the work. His former wife, Brooke, had looked him over with a small, satisfied pause before turning back to Grant, the private equity executive she had married 18 months after leaving Mason. Caleb Wynn, Mason's oldest friend and tonight's groom, had embraced him at the ceremony, whispered, "I'm glad you came," and then spent most of the reception avoiding the far side of the room. Now Grant stood near the bandstand, holding the microphone as though the wedding belonged to him. "The best partnerships," he said, his gaze sliding toward Mason, "are built by people who know when to move forward. Some folks spend their whole lives maintaining the same tired little structure, wondering why everyone else passed them." A ripple of laughter moved across the tables. Grant smiled wider. Brooke lowered her eyes, but Mason saw the curve at the corner of her mouth. "There's nothing noble about staying small," Grant continued. "Sometimes what people call loyalty is just fear with good manners." The guests laughed again, more cautiously this time, because the target had become obvious. Mason felt heat rise beneath his collar. He could hear a server stacking plates beyond the swinging kitchen doors. He could smell roasted beef, perfume, candle wax, and the cold, metallic scent that came from the train hall whenever the outer doors opened. He pictured Ellie asleep beneath her quilt at Mrs. Alden's house, her stuffed fox tucked beneath her chin. He pictured the lunch he had packed for Monday, the utility bill under a magnet on the refrigerator, the loose porch step he needed to repair before winter. These were small things, perhaps, but they were real. They had weight. They were his. Grant lifted his glass toward the back of the room. "So here's to Caleb and Lauren. May they never confuse standing still with standing strong." This time, the laughter died before it fully began. Several people glanced at Mason and then away. Mason released the chair he had been gripping. He did not want to give Grant anger. Anger would become another story told about him. Poor Mason finally snapped. Couldn't handle seeing Brooke happy. Still bitter after all these years. He turned toward the service corridor, deciding he could leave through the kitchen, retrieve his old pickup from the public garage, and be home before Ellie woke. He had taken only 2 steps when the great bronze doors at the north entrance opened so hard that one struck its stopper with a crack that echoed through the hall. Conversation stopped. The musicians faltered. Even Grant lowered the microphone. A woman in a dark green evening gown stood beneath the archway, one hand still on the door, her expression composed but unmistakably furious. 2 security officers remained behind her. She searched the room once, found Mason near the kitchen, and called across 300 silent guests, "Mason Reed, do not take another step." 36 hours earlier, Mason had been kneeling beneath his kitchen sink with a flashlight between his teeth when Ellie wandered in, wearing flannel pajamas and carrying a cream-colored envelope. "It was under the grocery coupons," she said. "I think it's fancy because it has gold on it." Mason backed out carefully, bumped his head on the cabinet frame, and muttered something he hoped his daughter had not heard. The envelope bore Caleb and Lauren's names in embossed script. Mason had placed it beneath the coupons after accepting the invitation weeks earlier, as though paper could be hidden from anxiety. "That's the wedding," he said. "The one tomorrow?" Ellie climbed onto a chair and watched him tighten the leaking pipe. "The one where Mom will be?" "Yes." "And Mr. Grant?" "Probably." Ellie considered this with the grave concentration she usually reserved for deciding whether a caterpillar needed rescuing. "He doesn't say hello to you at school. Some people are busy." He wasn't busy. He was standing by the car. Mason set the wrench down and wiped his hands on an old towel. Ellie had inherited his dark eyes and Brooke's instinct for noticing what adults preferred to hide. Since the divorce, Mason had tried never to recruit her into his hurt. Brooke loved Ellie, though inconsistently. She appeared for school performances, bought extravagant birthday presents, and called 3 nights a week when her travel schedule allowed. But the difficult hours belonged to Mason. Stomach flu at 2 in the morning, forgotten permission slips, nightmares, spelling tests, scraped knees, and the quiet questions children asked when they sensed that a parent had chosen another life. Mason lifted Ellie onto the counter. "Tomorrow is about Uncle Caleb and Aunt Lauren," he said. "Not your mom, not Mr. Grant, and not me." "Do you want to go?" He hesitated. "Wanting isn't always the same as doing the right thing." "Oh, that sounds like something teachers say when recess gets canceled." Mason laughed, despite himself. "Caleb was my friend before either of us could drive. He showed up when you were born. He sat beside me in the hospital when your mother and I—" He stopped. Ellie knew enough about the divorce. She did not need details. "When things were hard," he finished. "So I told him I'd be there." Ellie leaned against him. "Then I'll make you something brave." Their house stood on a tree-lined street in Brookside, where old brick cottages and craftsman homes were being purchased, demolished, and replaced by angular houses of glass and limestone. Mason's place had cedar shingles, a deep porch, and a roof that needed replacing sooner than his savings account preferred. It had belonged to his grandparents. He had refinished the oak floors after leaving the army and built Ellie's bedroom shelves himself. Developers had offered him more money than the house was worth, but he had refused. Every doorway held a memory that had survived Brooke's departure. Beyond Mason's backyard fence rose the estate of Vivian Calder, founder and chief executive of Calder North, a transportation technology and infrastructure company whose name appeared on electric buses, rail control systems, port cranes, and financial pages across the country. Her property had once been 3 separate lots. She had combined them into a private compound of pale stone, dark windows, old trees moved at enormous expense, and enough discreet security equipment to make the block feel occasionally observed by satellites. Vivian herself was rarely seen. Mason sometimes noticed her leaving before dawn in a black sedan, or returning after midnight with a phone pressed to her ear. She was 35, according to newspapers, and worth several $billion, according to magazines that treated wealth like weather. Ellie knew her only as the lady with the giant dog. The giant dog appeared in Mason's yard just after sunrise on Saturday. Mason was outside in work pants and a thermal shirt, replacing a warped board in the back fence before dressing for the wedding. The November air carried the smell of wet leaves and chimney smoke. Ellie sat on the porch steps, coloring, while Mrs. Alden, their retired neighbor, waited inside with a pot of coffee. A low rustle came from the hedge. Then a black dog the size of a small horse pushed through a gap near the lilac bushes, trotted across the lawn, and stopped in front of Ellie. Mason dropped the drill. "Ellie, stay still." The Doberman did not growl. He lowered his head and nudged the purple crayon in her hand. Ellie looked at Mason. "He wants to color." "I don't think that's what he wants." Mason approached sideways, speaking softly. The dog wore a leather collar with a brass plate engraved Atlas. A length of thin wire trailed from it, likely part of an electronic boundary system torn loose when a landscaping crew had removed an old root ball along the property line. Atlas sniffed Mason's palm, then leaned his full weight against Mason's leg with the confidence of an animal accustomed to being forgiven. A woman's voice sounded beyond the hedge. Atlas. The dog's ears lifted. Vivian Calder stepped through the opening wearing dark trousers, riding boots, and a charcoal coat belted at the waist. Her hair, usually seen in photographs as a precise black sweep, was loosely braided over one shoulder. Without the armor of a boardroom, she looked younger, though no less commanding. Atlas returned to her, but did not sit until she touched 2 fingers to his collar. Vivian examined the broken wire, then the fence board in Mason's hand. "My grounds crew cut the boundary line yesterday," she said. "They assured me it had been repaired." It wasn't. Clearly. She looked at Ellie. "Did he frighten you?" Ellie shook her head. "He ate the purple crayon." Atlas worked his jaw once, and half a crayon dropped into the grass. Vivian stared at him. "That explains several things." Ellie giggled. Mason had never heard anyone on the street laugh in Vivian's presence, but something in the billionaire's face softened at the sound. "I'm sorry," Vivian said. "My security director will send someone to close the gap. I'm already replacing the board, then I'll pay for the materials. It's one board. Damage originated on my side. It's still one board." Vivian studied him as though resistance from a man holding a cordless drill had not appeared on her schedule. Her gaze moved to the old house, the children's chalk on the patio, the laundry turning slowly on a line beneath the porch roof. "You're Mason Reed." It was not a question. "That depends. Are your attorneys nearby?" "Not before breakfast." He smiled faintly. "Then yes." Ellie held up her drawing. "My dad has to go to a wedding where people might be mean." Mason closed his eyes. "Thank you, Ellie. You said we tell the truth. We also learned timing." Vivian's attention returned to Mason. "Why would people be mean to you at a wedding? It's complicated. Most cruelty is simple. People decorate it afterward." Mrs. Alden opened the kitchen door and called Ellie inside for pancakes. Ellie hugged Atlas around the neck before running away, leaving Mason alone beside the fence with a woman who negotiated acquisitions on live television without blinking. Mason fitted the new board into place. "The groom is an old friend. The bride is my former sister-in-law. My ex-wife and her husband will be there. And her husband dislikes you. He dislikes anyone who doesn't envy him." Vivian crouched to inspect the severed boundary wire. "Grant Mercer?" Mason looked at her sharply. She noticed. "You live beside a woman whose company receives threats," she said. "My security team knows the names of neighboring residents and their immediate families. I also know Mercer Equity has requested a strategic partnership with Calder North 4 times in 6 months. Then you know more about him than I do. I know what he claims to own. That is not always the same thing." Mason drove a screw through the board. "I'm not asking you to take sides. You haven't asked me for anything." "Good." He stood and flexed his cold fingers. "I plan to keep it that way." Vivian's eyes dropped to the garment bag hanging inside the open back door. The plastic was clear enough to reveal his aging Navy suit. "Is that what you're wearing?" "It's either that or my Army dress uniform, and I'm not turning someone else's wedding into a military reunion." "The suit is exhausted. It and I have an understanding, a poor one." She said it without mockery, which made it more difficult to resent. Mason leaned the drill against the fence. "You always this direct with strangers?" "Only when they are pretending not to know something." "And what am I pretending? That you are going to walk into a room where people have already decided what your life means, and that their decision does not matter to you." The words landed too close. Mason looked toward the porch where Ellie's paper sun was visible through the kitchen window. "It matters less than it used to." "That was not my question." "No," he admitted. "It matters." Vivian stood. The morning light caught a faint scar near her left temple, usually hidden by her hair. Why attend? Because Caleb asked. Because once, when I came home from Afghanistan and couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time, he sat on this porch until sunrise and never asked me to explain. Because friendship should not disappear the first time it becomes inconvenient. Has he shown you the same loyalty? Mason did not answer. Vivian's expression changed, almost imperceptibly. Not pity, recognition. There are rooms, she said, where the most expensive person is still the poorest thing in them. She clipped a new leash to Atlas's collar. Do not confuse being outnumbered with being wrong. Mason glanced at her. Is that advice from a billionaire? No. From a woman who has spent 15 years being told she entered through the wrong door. She started toward the opening in the hedge, then stopped. What time is the wedding? 5. Union Station? How did you... The Mercer family has been discussing it as though they negotiated peace in Europe. Her mouth tightened in something nearly resembling amusement. Your daughter is correct, Mr. Reed. You should have a brave night. Mason watched her leave, unsettled less by her power than by the fact that she had seen through him in under 10 minutes. The suit looked worse at 3 in the afternoon. Mason stood before the mirror in his bedroom while Ellie, wearing socks that did not match, sat cross-legged on the bed and supervised. Your tie is crooked, she said. I haven't tied it yet. Then it's very crooked. Mrs. Alden had pressed his shirt and polished his shoes without being asked. On the dresser lay Mason's old Army commendation box, opened only because he had been searching for cufflinks. The bronze medals and ribbons looked like objects belonging to another man. After high school, Mason had enlisted to escape a home already hollowed by his father's drinking. He spent 8 years as a combat engineer, repairing roads and building temporary bridges where every culvert could conceal explosives. He had learned that panic was expensive, that noise often hid weakness, and that the most important person in a crisis was rarely the loudest. When he returned, he used his education benefits to earn an engineering degree and accepted a job with the Kansas City Department of Public Works. The salary was modest. The work was not. Mason inspected bridges, retaining walls, parking structures, and public buildings, often catching failures before anyone else knew danger had existed. Brooke once admired his steadiness. Later, she called it complacency. Grant had called it government-grade ambition at a school fundraiser, then laughed as though Mason should thank him for the joke. Ellie slid from the bed and approached the dresser. Did you get these because you were brave? Sometimes medals are for being in the place where bravery was needed. That means yes. She picked up a small silver pin shaped like an army castle. Mason took it gently from her. This was for my unit. Wear it. It doesn't belong on this suit. Maybe the suit needs help. He fastened the pin inside the jacket where no one would see it. Ellie nodded, satisfied, then handed him the drawing she had made. In the picture, the woman beside him had long black hair and a green dress. Who is that? Mason asked. I don't know yet. That's convenient. She's someone who sees you. Mason felt his throat tighten. Where did you hear that? Nobody said it. I just drew it. Children could be careless with crayons and devastating with truth. Mason folded the drawing and placed it in his inner pocket over the hidden pin. Before leaving, he knelt and held Ellie close. No matter what time it is, you call me if you need me, even if the people are mean. Especially then. She cupped his face in both hands. Don't let them make your shoulders small. Mason drew back. Did Mrs. Calder say that? Ellie grinned. She came over while you were in the shower. She brought Mrs. Alden tea, and Atlas brought me a new box of crayons. Mason glanced through the window toward the estate next door. What else did she say? She asked when you were leaving. Why? She didn't tell me. Mrs. Alden called from downstairs that Mason would be late. He kissed Ellie's forehead, put on the tired suit, and drove away in his rusted blue pickup without noticing the black sedan parked beneath the sycamores across the street. Union Station had been transformed into a palace of winter light. Glass candles floated above the tables. White branches glittered beneath the vaulted ceiling. A jazz trio played near the old ticket windows while servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. Mason parked 3 blocks away because the garage attendant directed his pickup toward an overflow level. By the time he entered, the ceremony was about to begin. Lauren, Brooke's younger sister, looked genuinely pleased to see him. She hugged him beneath her veil and whispered, "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." Caleb embraced him next, but the groom's eyes kept moving toward the front row, where Grant sat beside Brooke and several potential investors. "We'll talk after the honeymoon," Caleb murmured. "Things have been complicated." Mason knew then that no real conversation would happen. Complicated was what people called cowardice when they hoped time would make it respectable. He took his assigned seat near the rear. During the vows, he remembered Caleb at 19, barefoot on the hood of a broken car, swearing they would be brothers forever. He remembered Lauren as a teenager raiding Brooke's closet. He remembered Brooke standing beside him in a courthouse chapel years before the expensive ceremony they later held, squeezing his hand and promising she would never mistake quietness for weakness. Memory did not arrive in order. It came like glass swept beneath a rug, cutting whenever he stepped wrong. At the reception, Brooke found him near the coat check. She wore a silver gown and diamond earrings Grant had given her after closing a hotel acquisition. Her beauty remained familiar enough to hurt, though the woman inside it had become someone Mason no longer knew. "You actually came," she said. "Caleb invited me." He felt guilty. Then I saved him from wasting the feeling. Brooke glanced toward Grant, who was holding court among 3 bankers. "You could have bought a new suit." "I could have, but you didn't." "Correct." The old frustration flashed across her face. "This is what I mean, Mason. You walk into rooms already expecting people to judge you, then refuse to make any effort. I came to a wedding, Brooke, not a loan interview. Appearances matter. They mattered to you. They matter to everyone." He thought of Ellie drawing a woman who saw him. "Not everyone." Brooke's gaze sharpened. "Are you seeing someone?" The question carried surprise rather than jealousy, as if the possibility offended the natural order. "My personal life isn't your concern. I'm only asking because Ellie mentioned a woman next door." "Ellie mentioned a neighbor. The Calder woman?" Brooke laughed once. "Mason, she probably doesn't know your first name." Mason remembered Vivian saying it across the yard. He chose not to answer. Grant approached and placed his hand at Brooke's waist. "There he is," he said, "Public Service's favorite survivor." Mason nodded. "Grant. Still inspecting cracks for the city? Still creating them for investors?" Grant's smile paused. Brooke looked between them. Mason had not intended the remark, but he did not withdraw it. Grant leaned closer. "Careful. You're in a room full of people whose taxes pay your salary. Then they should be glad I keep their bridges standing." A few nearby guests heard and turned away to hide smiles. Grant's face hardened. "Enjoy the chicken," he said. "I'm told your table is near the kitchen. Convenient. I know how to open a door myself." Dinner passed slowly. Mason sat with distant cousins, a retired music teacher, and an accountant who spent 20 minutes explaining luxury car depreciation. Caleb visited every table except Mason's. Brooke laughed loudly whenever Grant spoke. Mason drank water and checked his phone beneath the linen. Mrs. Alden sent a photograph of Ellie asleep on the couch with Atlas stretched across the rug beside her. Behind them, at the edge of the photograph, stood a pair of elegant black shoes. Vivian was still at Mason's house. He typed, "Why is Mrs. Calder there?" Mrs. Alden replied, "She said her dog refused to leave." Then she asked whether you owned an umbrella. It may rain. Mason looked toward the tall windows. The sky beyond the glass was clear. Before he could respond, the speeches began. Lauren's father spoke first, then Caleb's sister, followed by two college friends. Grant had not been listed, but wealth often placed itself wherever it wished. He took the microphone with a drink in his hand and performed charm for several minutes. The room loved him. He knew the names of donors, board members, athletes, and politicians. He congratulated Caleb for joining a family that understood growth. Then he turned from the bride and groom toward the audience. Marriage, Grant said, is a merger of vision. Mason felt the first warning in his chest. It works when both parties recognize value. It fails when one person keeps building yesterday while the other is ready for tomorrow. Brooke's fingers tightened around her champagne stem. Caleb looked at Grant but did not intervene. We all know people who confuse routine with virtue, Grant continued. They stay in the same job, the same house, the same little circle, and call it character. But the truth is, life rewards motion. His eyes found Mason. There is no prize for becoming a monument to what someone else had to escape. The cruelty was so naked that even the people who disliked Mason shifted uncomfortably. Grant enjoyed the discomfort. It demonstrated power. Some men believe being abandoned makes them honorable, he said. It doesn't. Sometimes it only means the world conducted an audit. A few guests laughed because they were afraid not to. Brooke did nothing. Caleb stared at his plate. Mason felt the room narrow around him. His breathing shortened. For an instant, he was back inside a damaged culvert overseas, dust filling his mouth. Someone shouting that the second charge had not detonated. He pressed his thumb against the folded edge of Ellie's drawing. Have a brave night. Bravery did not require him to remain available for abuse. Dignity was not endless endurance. Mason stood, quietly pushed in his chair, and walked toward the service corridor. He would not shout. He would not strike Grant. He would simply remove himself and allow the room to live with what it had applauded. That was when the bronze doors opened and Vivian Calder ordered him to stop. She crossed the reception hall without hurry. The green of her gown was deep as pine beneath rain, cut simply, without sequins or lace. A narrow diamond bracelet shone at one wrist. She carried no evening bag. She needed neither decoration nor introduction. Recognition spread table by table. A city councilman rose without realizing he had done so. Two executives from a rail consortium whispered urgently. Grant placed the microphone on its stand and stepped down from the platform, his earlier amusement replaced by calculation. Vivian ignored him. Her eyes remained on Mason. "Turn around," she said when she reached the center aisle. Mason did. The room disappeared at the edges. Vivian stopped several feet away. "You were leaving. That was the plan. Because of him?" She glanced once toward Grant. "Because I chose to." "Good." Her answer surprised him. Leaving cruelty is not surrender. But leave because the room is beneath you, not because you believe what was said. Mason heard a murmur travel across the guests. Vivian extended her hand. "Come here." He walked toward her. He could feel every stare, but for the first time that evening, the attention did not reduce him. Vivian reached inside the pocket of her wrap and removed a slim leather folder. "I intended to speak to you privately," she said. Then I heard the final portion of Mr. Mercer's toast. "How much?" "Enough to understand the quality of the speaker." Grant approached with Brooke beside him. Caleb and Lauren followed at a distance. "Ms. Calder," Grant said, recovering a portion of his polished smile. What an unexpected honor. Grant Mercer. Mercer Equity. Vivian looked at him as one might examine a stain on a carpet. We have met twice. Grant's smile stiffened. Of course. At the Governor's Transportation Summit. You interrupted me both times. A few guests looked down at their tables. Grant gave a careful laugh. I've been hoping to reconnect. My team submitted a revised proposal regarding Calder North's logistics division. I read it. Excellent. Then perhaps Monday we could— No. The word was quiet. It carried farther than Grant's entire speech. Vivian opened the leather folder and turned to Mason. 6 months ago, a parking structure near the riverfront developed progressive shear failure in 2 support columns. The contractor's initial inspection called the cracking cosmetic. A municipal engineer disagreed. Mason's face changed. He knew the structure. He had spent 3 nights reviewing load calculations after discovering hairline fractures beneath fresh paint. His supervisor had warned him not to accuse a politically connected contractor without proof. Mason had found proof anyway. He ordered an emergency closure 20 minutes before a section of the 3rd level collapsed. No one was injured. The city issued a brief statement praising departmental diligence. Mason's name had never appeared. That engineer, Vivian continued, remained on site during evacuation, entered the lower level after security reported a missing maintenance worker, and located him behind a locked equipment cage. The facility housed vehicles belonging to Calder North's regional office. 58 employees were scheduled to arrive for a company event that morning. Mason looked at her. How do you know this? I asked better questions than the city press office expected. Vivian faced the room. Mason Reed prevented a mass casualty event. He refused an interview, refused a commendation ceremony, and requested that the maintenance worker receive the only public recognition because, according to his report, the man had first noticed dust falling from the ceiling. Silence settled over the hall, different now from the silence Grant had created. This one held shame. Vivian turned back to Mason. Calder North has spent 4 months designing an independent infrastructure risk division. I came tonight to offer you its directorship. Mason stared at the folder. You never mentioned You would have spent the day worrying about a decision that did not need to be made before your friend's wedding. You came here to offer me a job? I came here because the offer belongs in your hands, not in your inbox. Her eyes moved toward the kitchen doors. Then I saw you preparing to leave as if you were the person who had behaved shamefully. Grant's confidence cracked. This is all very admirable, he said, but I'm sure nobody intended real offense. We were joking among friends. Mason looked at Caleb. His oldest friend could not meet his eyes. Vivian closed the folder. Public humiliation is rarely mistaken for humor by the person providing it. Grant's jaw tightened. With respect, this is a family matter. You made it a room matter when you used a microphone. Brooke stepped forward. Vivian, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Grant has a strong personality, but Mason knows he doesn't mean half of what he says. Do you often ask your former husband to interpret your current husband's character? Brooke flushed. Vivian's tone remained level. You are free to admire Mr. Mercer. Calder North is equally free to decline association with him. Grant glanced toward the executive seated near the front. Is this about my proposal? Your proposal failed before tonight. On what basis? Debt exposure, concealed cross-collateralization, inflated portfolio valuations, and the curious use of pension-backed assets to support ventures presented as independently capitalized. Grant went still. Several bankers exchanged looks. Vivian continued without raising her voice. My compliance division sent its findings to your counsel yesterday. You would know that if your chief financial officer had not resigned this afternoon. Brooke turned toward Grant. Resigned? It's routine restructuring, he said quickly. Nothing has been finalized. Vivian's gaze hardened. The pension trustees may disagree. You have no right to discuss confidential. I have every right to state why Calder North will not place employees, vendors, or public contracts within reach of your firm. Grant's face reddened. You're doing this because of him? He pointed at Mason. The gesture revealed more than the accusation. Vivian stepped between them. No, your numbers condemned you. Your conduct merely saved me from wondering whether there was a decent man beneath them. Grant looked around for support. The people who had laughed now studied their silverware. Power had shifted, and their loyalty moved with it. Mason felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Brooke came closer, lowering her voice. Mason, say something. This has gotten out of control. It was out of control when he used Caleb's wedding to punish me for existing. He'd been drinking. He knew my name sober. You could have told us about the parking garage, about the job. There was no job until tonight, and I shouldn't need a billionaire's offer before you decide I deserve basic decency. Brooke stared at him. For one exposed moment, the polished expression fell away. He saw uncertainty, regret, and the first faint recognition of what she had traded away. I never said you were a bad father, she whispered. No, Mason replied. You only taught Ellie that a good father could still be treated as a failed man. Brooke recoiled. He did not say it cruelly. That made it land harder. Caleb finally stepped forward. Mason, I'm sorry. Mason turned to him. You should be. I didn't know Grant was going to... You knew what he was like. You knew where you seated me. You watched him walk to the microphone. Caleb's eyes filled. I was trying to keep peace. Peace for whom? Caleb had no answer. Lauren took his hand, but her disappointment was directed at her new husband. Mason looked across the room at faces that had once belonged to friends. I came because our history mattered to me, he told Caleb. Tonight you showed me exactly how much it mattered to you. He did not announce the friendship's end. He simply allowed the truth to stand. Vivian offered Mason the folder again. He accepted it but did not open it. I'm not saying yes tonight, he said. A flicker of approval crossed her face. I would be concerned if you did. Grant gave a bitter laugh. Of course. The civil servant needs time to decide whether he can tolerate success. Mason looked at him. 3 years of swallowed anger rose, then settled. He no longer needed to throw it. You think success means entering a room and making someone smaller, he said. That's why you'll never have enough of it. Grant's mouth opened, but Mason continued. I repair things people depend on. Roads, bridges, a house my daughter feels safe in. I make breakfast. I sign school forms. I answer the phone at 2 a.m. You can laugh at the size of my paycheck, but you couldn't carry my life for a week without hiring someone to do the important parts. No one moved. Mason's voice never rose. You didn't take my wife because you were better. Brooke left because she wanted what you represented. That was her choice, but you've spent 3 years trying to prove the choice by humiliating me. A man who is truly happy doesn't work that hard to convince his predecessor. Grant's face emptied. Brooke looked down. Mason slipped Ellie's drawing from his pocket and unfolded it. The paper was creased, the sun uneven, the woman in green unexpectedly accurate. He smiled at the strange coincidence, then returned it to his jacket. I'm going home to my daughter. Vivian turned toward the entrance. My car is outside. My truck is 3 blocks away. It will be delivered. By whom? Someone who will not mock the upholstery. A quiet laugh escaped a table near the rear. Vivian gave Mason her arm, not as an actress pretending intimacy, but as an equal offering steadiness in a room that had denied it. Mason hesitated only a moment before taking it. As they walked down the aisle, people shifted aside. He saw no admiration in many faces, only regret born from embarrassment. That was not respect. Not yet. Respect would require them to behave differently when no powerful woman was watching. Near the doors, Mason stopped and looked back at Caleb. "Take care of Lauren," he said. "Better than you took care of our friendship." Caleb bowed his head. Mason and Vivian stepped into the night. Rain had begun despite the clear sky earlier, a fine cold mist silvering the pavement beneath the station lights. Vivian's sedan waited at the curb. Her driver held an umbrella, but Mason remained beneath the stone awning. The adrenaline that had carried him through the ballroom began to drain, leaving his hands unsteady. Vivian noticed and dismissed her security detail with a glance. "You held yourself together," she said. "That does not mean you are unaffected." Mason pressed his palms against his thighs. "I almost left through a kitchen. There is no dishonor in choosing an exit. It felt like running." "You entered a damaged structure, assessed that it was unsafe, and moved toward open air. That sounds professionally consistent." He laughed, then covered his face with one hand. The laughter broke unexpectedly into something rougher. He turned away, ashamed of tears he had postponed for years. Vivian did not touch him immediately. She stood beside him in the rain-dampened air, giving him the dignity of silence. "I spent 3 years telling Ellie her mother didn't leave because of her," he said at last. "Somewhere along the way, I started believing Brooke left because of me. Not because the marriage failed, because I was insufficient." Vivian's reply came softly. "People often rename another person's virtues when those virtues no longer serve their desires. Patience becomes dullness. Loyalty becomes weakness. Contentment becomes failure." Mason lowered his hand. "You sound like you've had practice." She looked toward the street. "My father founded a small freight software company. When he became ill, the board decided his 21-year-old daughter would be easy to remove. One director told me I lacked the temperament to lead. Another suggested I marry someone credible and remain a ceremonial shareholder." "What did you do?" "I read every contract they assumed I would not understand. I found where they had diverted licensing revenue. By the following spring, I owned their voting shares." "That sounds terrifying." "It was lonely." The word came without performance. Mason saw then that her estate, security, drivers, and impossible schedule were not only symbols of power, they were also walls built by someone who had learned that admiration often concealed appetite. "Why me?" he asked. "The job offer makes sense. Tonight doesn't." Vivian folded her arms against the cold. "After the parking structure incident, I reviewed your file, not the version prepared by my security team, your professional record. You had reported deficiencies in 3 city projects that politically connected contractors wanted ignored. You had been passed over for promotion twice after refusing to approve incomplete repairs. You volunteered for emergency inspections during the spring floods. You never attached your name to the public statements." "That still doesn't explain the dress." Vivian glanced at the green silk. "Your daughter said people might be mean." "Ellie asked you to come?" "She asked whether powerful people were allowed to stop bullies." Mason groaned. "I'm going to have a conversation with her about boundaries. Do not discourage efficient delegation." He smiled. Vivian's expression warmed. "I told her power does not make a person good. What matters is what one protects with it. And you decided to protect me. I decided to stand where the truth could be seen." She paused. "There is a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. You did not need rescuing. You needed a witness who could not be intimidated. The distinction settled deeply in him. Vivian stepped closer. Also, I have attended 9 corporate dinners this month. Arriving late to a wedding and frightening Grant Mercer was the first enjoyable event on my calendar. Mason laughed again, this time without breaking. The driver opened the car door. Before entering, Mason looked at the folder in his hand. Independent authority? Written into the charter. No political overrides? None. I choose my own inspectors, within an obscene but finite budget. Public safety findings cannot be buried for investor relations. Agreed. And I'm home for Ellie's school concert next month. Vivian's eyes held his. That condition is not negotiable. Then I'll read it. That is all I asked. When the sedan reached Brookside, Atlas was asleep on Mason's porch with his head in Ellie's lap. Mrs. Alden sat nearby drinking tea from a porcelain cup that looked too delicate for Mason's kitchen. Ellie woke the moment the car door closed and ran barefoot across the porch. Mason caught her beneath the arms and lifted her. "You came home brave," she murmured against his neck. "I came home. Did the people make your shoulders small?" He glanced at Vivian. "They tried." Ellie leaned back and examined him. "They look normal." "That's because someone reminded me." Vivian approached, carrying the leather folder. Ellie's eyes widened when she saw the gown. "You're the lady in my picture." "Apparently," Vivian said. "Your artistic process is unsettling." Ellie looked between them. "Did you stop the bully?" Mason set her down. Mrs. Calder helped the truth arrive on time. "Did Dad help too?" Vivian's answer was immediate. "Your father did the hardest part." Ellie took Vivian's hand as though the matter were settled and led her toward the porch. Atlas rose, stretched, and followed. Mason stood in the yard beneath the dripping branches, looking at the old house with its peeling trim and warm kitchen windows. For years he had believed the building was the last surviving piece of his life before Brooke left. Now he understood it differently. It was not a monument to what had ended. It was the place where he and Ellie had begun again. Inside, Mrs. Alden insisted everyone eat pie. Vivian removed her bracelet before helping Ellie cut slices, an action so ordinary that Mason found it more revealing than the confrontation at Union Station. When Vivian finally left after midnight, she paused by the broken section of fence. "My contractor will repair this Monday." Mason shook his head. "The board is already fixed. The boundary wire is not. We can do it together." She looked at him. "Are you proposing a joint infrastructure project?" "Limited scope, shared liability. I'll have council draft terms. No attorneys before breakfast." "You remembered." "I remember important things." Something unguarded passed through her expression. Then Atlas pulled gently on the leash, and she walked home through the wet leaves. Mason spent Sunday reading the Calder North offer at the kitchen table, while Ellie built a city from wooden blocks on the floor. The salary was more than 3 times what he earned. The benefits included a college fund contribution, flexible travel, and authority over a national team of engineers and safety auditors. Yet the part that held him longest was a paragraph granting the division power to suspend projects without executive approval when human life was at risk. Vivian had built independence into the position before knowing whether he would accept. She did not want a loyal employee. She wanted an honest one. Mason called her that afternoon. "I have changes," he said. "I expected several. Whistleblower protection needs to cover contractors, not only employees." "Agreed. Inspection reports should become public after remediation deadlines expire." "Our attorneys will object. Then they'll have something to do." There was a pause. "Anything else?" "I won't move. I did not ask you to." People in positions like this usually buy houses farther west. Your house has a superior oak tree. My roof leaks. That can be repaired. I'll repair it. Another pause, softer this time. I know, Vivian said. Mason accepted the position 2 weeks later. He gave the city a month's notice and refused Vivian's offer to shorten it. During those weeks, Grant Mercer's financial troubles became public. Several pension trustees filed suit. Federal regulators opened an inquiry into Mercer Equity's disclosures. Mason did not celebrate. The collapse affected assistants, analysts, and families who had never sat beneath the chandeliers at Union Station. He agreed to provide technical information regarding one warehouse project, but declined every request for comment about the wedding. Brooke called 4 times before he answered. I'm not asking you to help Grant, she said. Good. I'm asking whether Ellie can stay with me next weekend. You canceled the last 2. I know. I want to do better. Mason listened for manipulation and heard mostly exhaustion. Ellie needs consistency, he said. Not promises made because your life is frightening. Brooke began to cry. Once her tears could reorganize his entire heart. Now he felt compassion without surrender. I was cruel that night, she said. Before that night, too. Yes. I told myself you judged me for wanting more. I judged how you left. Not that you left. Grant made me feel like I was finally living. Maybe he did. And you made me feel safe. Mason looked through the window. Ellie and Vivian were outside repairing the boundary wire while Atlas repeatedly stole their gloves. Safety looked small to you because you had never lost it, he said. Brooke was silent. I'm sorry, she whispered. Mason believed she meant it in that moment. He also knew remorse was not repair. Be there Saturday at 10, he said. Not 10:30. Not. Ellie will be waiting. I will. Then start with that. Caleb came to Mason's porch in December carrying 2 coffees and no excuse. Snow had begun falling, light and dry, catching in his hair. Mason considered leaving him outside. Instead, he opened the door and returned to the workbench where he was assembling a model bridge for Ellie's school science night. Caleb stood awkwardly among clamps and pieces of balsa wood. Lauren is furious with me, he said. She should be. She said I spent our wedding protecting Grant because I wanted access to his investors. Mason fitted a crossbrace into place. Was she wrong? Caleb looked at the floor. No. The answer cost him something. Mason respected the cost, but did not make it easier. I kept telling myself I was helping my new family, Caleb continued. Grant had promised to finance the expansion of our clinic. I thought if I stayed out of it, everyone would calm down. You watched him humiliate me. I did. You seated me by the kitchen because Brooke said Grant didn't want me near the head table. I did. And you called me your oldest friend. Caleb's eyes filled. I was ashamed before Vivian walked in. Afterward, everyone assumed I regretted it because she was powerful. But the truth is, I regretted it when you stood up to leave. I saw your face and knew I had traded a man who sat beside me through my father's funeral for a loan Grant hadn't even signed. Mason set down the bridge piece. What do you want from me? Nothing tonight. I wanted to say it without asking you to make me feel better. Caleb placed the coffee on the bench. I failed you. Mason had imagined this apology and thought it would bring satisfaction. Instead, it brought grief for something once valuable. Yes, he said. Caleb nodded and moved toward the door. Ellie's science night is Thursday, Mason said. Caleb stopped. She asked whether Uncle Caleb was coming. Hope appeared too quickly in his face. Mason raised a hand. This is not forgiveness. It is a chance to show up for her. I'll be there. 6:30. I'll be early. Caleb was. He arrived at 6 with Lauren and helped carry display boards. Trust did not return in a speech. It returned in small acts repeated long after the audience had gone. By spring, Mason's division had halted 2 unsafe warehouse expansions, uncovered falsified concrete tests on a transit hub, and forced Calder North to replace a contractor whose political connections had protected him for years. Industry publications called Mason relentless. Employees called him at home because he answered. He hired engineers who had been ignored after raising concerns and gave field inspectors direct access to his office. Vivian argued with him often. She wanted faster timelines. He wanted more testing. She wanted a project announced. He insisted on reviewing soil movement after heavy rain. Their disagreements were sharp, private, and strangely respectful. Neither punished the other for telling the truth. Outside work, their lives joined more slowly. Vivian began appearing for Saturday breakfast, first because Atlas had developed a devotion to Ellie's dropped waffles, then because she no longer bothered inventing reasons. She attended Ellie's school concert and sat in the second row wearing a plain gray coat, though half the parents recognized her. When Ellie froze during her violin piece, Mason smiled from one side of the aisle and Vivian from the other. Ellie found them both and began again. Mason repaired Vivian's greenhouse heater during an ice storm. Vivian arranged for Mrs. Alden's failing porch roof to be replaced, then permitted the woman to believe Mason had negotiated an outrageous discount. They did not discuss romance until a June evening when lightning bugs flickered above the yards and Ellie had fallen asleep in a hammock with Atlas beneath her. Mason and Vivian sat on the shared fence rail, now reinforced but deliberately left with a small gate between the properties. "You know," Mason said, "people at work believe you hired me because we were secretly involved. People at work also believe I sleep 4 hours a night." "Don't you?" 3.5. He looked at her. "Were we secretly involved?" "Not to my knowledge." "Would you object?" Vivian's composure slipped just enough to reveal surprise. "That depends on the proposed terms. Dinner. No security team at the next table. No acquisition strategy. No discussion of concrete failure unless the restaurant collapses." "And your daughter?" "She has informed me that you should be allowed to stay for pancakes afterward." Vivian watched Ellie sleeping beneath the maple tree. "Your daughter negotiates aggressively. She learned from the neighbor. And what do you want, Mason?" He considered the question carefully. Once he might have answered with what he thought would keep a person from leaving. Now he knew better. "I want to know you when no one is watching," he said. "I want you to know me when I'm not being defended. I want honesty even when it's inconvenient. And I want to move slowly enough that Ellie never has to wonder whether she was an obstacle." Vivian's eyes glistened in the fading light. "Those terms are acceptable." "You haven't heard the restaurant. I own several," Mason groaned. "We're going somewhere with laminated menu. Then I may require protective clothing." He laughed and held out his hand. She took it. A year after the wedding, Mason stood in the same navy suit inside Ellie's school gymnasium, though the jacket had been properly tailored and the army pin was fastened openly near the inside lapel. The gym smelled of popcorn, floor wax, and tempera paint. Cardboard bridges stretched across folding tables beneath banners announcing Family Engineering Night. Ellie's bridge was built from craft sticks, glue, and stubborn optimism. Its support towers were painted blue. A tiny paper house stood at one end and a green building at the other. Between them, she had drawn a gate. Caleb and Lauren arrived early with their infant son. Brooke came on time, alone, carrying a tray of cookies she had baked herself. Her life had changed after Grant's indictment and the collapse of Mercer Equity, but she no longer spoke of herself as a victim of his deception. She had begun counseling, found work with a nonprofit arts program, and kept every scheduled weekend with Ellie for 6 months. Mason noticed the effort without confusing it for redemption completed. Vivian entered through the side door wearing dark trousers and carrying Atlas's leash, though pets were not technically permitted inside. The principal saw her, saw the dog, and decided policy could survive one evening of flexibility. Ellie ran to them. "We have to test the bridge!" She loaded metal washers into a paper cup suspended from its center. The bridge held through 10, 20, then 30 pounds. At 32, one craft stick cracked. The center dipped but did not collapse because Ellie had added a second layer beneath it. "Redundancy," she announced proudly. "Dad says strong things need another way to carry weight." Mason looked at Vivian. She was already looking at him. Around them, parents talked, children shouted, and folding chairs scraped across the floor. There were no chandeliers, no society photographers, no men measuring one another by watches or portfolios. Yet Mason felt richer than he had in any room of his life. Ellie tugged both adults closer to her display. Brooke stood a few feet away, watching quietly. Her expression held sadness, but also acceptance. She approached Mason while Ellie explained load distribution to Vivian. "She adores her," Brooke said. "Vivian adores her too." "And you?" Mason looked at the woman in green kneeling beside his daughter, listening with complete attention as Ellie described why the paper house needed a porch. "Yes," he said. Brooke nodded. "I'm glad." It might have been painful for her to say. That did not make it less true. "Thank you," Mason replied. No revenge passed between them. No victory needed announcing. Brooke had lost a marriage through choices they could not undo. Mason had survived without becoming cruel. That was enough. Later, after the gym emptied and the bridge was packed carefully into the back of Mason's pickup, Vivian stood beneath the parking lot lights with her hands in her coat pockets. Her sedan waited across the street, but she had arrived with Mason and intended to leave with him. Ellie climbed into the truck, Atlas settling awkwardly across the rear floor. Mason remained outside for a moment, looking at the worn blue paint, the repaired fender, and Vivian beside it in shoes that had probably never before touched a school parking lot. "You could replace this vehicle," she said. "It starts." That is a low standard. It carried Ellie home from the hospital. Sentiment is not a maintenance plan. "You sound like my director of infrastructure risk." "He is extremely difficult." Mason stepped closer. "You once told me I had forgotten who I was." "You had. I thought that night changed everything." "Didn't it?" "Not exactly." He looked through the window at Ellie, who was making Atlas wear a paper medal. "You walking into that room didn't give me dignity. It showed me I had been carrying it the whole time." Vivian's face softened. "That was the intention. You also terrified 200 people, an operational benefit. And you wore green. Your daughter's drawing was specific." Mason smiled. "I knew it." Vivian lifted her chin. "Are you accusing me of allowing a 7-year-old to select my clothes?" "I'm accusing you of listening." "That is more serious." He took her hand. The night was cool, and somewhere beyond the school a train sounded across the city. Mason thought of the man he had been near the kitchen doors, shoulders bent beneath judgments that had never deserved authority. He felt no hatred for that man. He had been tired, wounded, and doing his best to protect a child while rebuilding a life from damaged pieces. Strength had not arrived with Vivian's entrance. It had been present in every lunch packed before dawn, every bridge inspected honestly, every restrained reply, every night he sat beside Ellie until her fear passed. Vivian had simply looked across a crowded room and refused to let him mistake silence for invisibility. Mason opened the passenger door for her. "Let's go home," he said. Vivian glanced toward the two houses separated by a fence with a gate that was rarely closed. "Which one?" Ellie leaned between the seats and answered before Mason could. "Ours." Vivian looked at Mason. He squeezed her hand once, and the quiet joy in her expression meant more than any public declaration. They climbed into the old truck together, carrying the cracked bridge carefully between them, because the things worth building did not become worthless when they showed strain. They became stronger where honest hands chose to mend them. True strength isn't measured by the size of your paycheck, the shine of your suit, or the applause you collect. It's measured by the quiet choices you make when no one seems to be on your side. Mason Reed walked into a room that hoped to shrink him, yet he left taller because he refused to trade his integrity for approval. His courage reminds us that dignity lives in everyday acts, packing lunches before dawn, fixing broken steps, and speaking truth even when a bully holds the microphone. And Vivian Calder's intervention shows how power finds its highest purpose when it shields the vulnerable instead of spotlighting itself. Together, their story urges us to honor our own worth, stand with those who are mocked, and remember that what we build with honesty will always outlast what others try to tear down. If this lesson moved you, tell us in the comments how you've chosen dignity over comfort, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that proves ordinary kindness can rewrite extraordinary moments. Let's grow a community that celebrates bravery not as a rare headline, but as a daily habit.